Yeah, so once again, I'm Joe Ikley, the Extension Weed Specialist, located here on campus in Fargo. So I think I heard during the last Q&A predictions for corn this upcoming year. I won't go that far, but I will go ahead and predict it's going to be a great year if you're a weed. Pretty easy prediction to make any year. So one of the things I want to focus on today, so I've got a few different topics that I want to cover here. And one of the things I just want to kind of state up front is a lot of times we'll kind of say weed control in corn is relatively easy. And certainly from a herbicide perspective, the portfolio we have available to us in corn, certainly more herbicide options than many of our other crops. But corn may be one of the most important crops for weed control as far as realizing your high-end yield and maximizing your potential. And so I kind of start with this picture from one of our research plots, and basically showing the first several weeks if we don't do anything to control our weeds. This is basically a mixture of common lamb's quarters and water hemp in this picture, and hopefully, in addition to seeing the stunted corn, to seeing how much more yellow that corn is, how much nitrogen the weeds are tying up. Certainly, one point of consideration for weed control in corn is we put in quite a lot of other inputs such as nitrogen, and the weeds are there to scavenge whatever they can. So the first topic I want to cover, just kind of the importance of that early season weed control in corn. So we know that with our herbicide portfolios in corn, we can get some pretty decent to complete weed control in many fields with the total post program. But I want to really focus on that first couple of weeks and why that's important for our corn yield. And so again, just highlighting the same picture I used on the cover slide. So within the weed guide, we have this table that is located within the corn section, which is pages 22 to 29 this year. But really highlighting the importance of early season weed control for corn. And so what we have on this table is some North Dakota research, 8 site years between Carrington and Minot, comparing that to a whole bunch of other states in the Midwest, and showing that, basically in these 8 site years locally, we did not see much of a yield loss when weeds were removed from a corn crop at the 2 to 6 inch weed height of the weeds. I kind of suspect that might change if we add more site years, especially if we add some locations from campus here. But showing that we really, in these site years, we're starting to lose our yield once weeds certainly got over 6 inches and quite rapidly. So from 2 to 6 inches, we had 0%, and then we started losing 16% of our yield once weeds were past 6 inches. Compared to other states that are regularly looking at corn weed control trials, started losing 6% of the yield as early as 2 to 6 inch weed removal. So basically doing nothing for weed control until the weeds got to 2 to 6 inches, already realizing yield loss. And so one individual I like to highlight some of his research, a colleague of mine in Ontario, Canada, Peter Sikkema, he's really good at doing the same trial year over year and trying to track yield loss based on weed height. And so I just highlight one of his tweets here. I do like to steal some of his slides from Twitter, but I'm going to blow up the graph here. And what Peter was looking at over a 3-year period was the influence of the weed size at the time of herbicide application on corn yield. And so I do apologize, this isn't centimeters, but basically 10 centimeters is about 4-inch weeds. And so over 7 years, Peter does a really good job tracking if a corn plot is weed-free throughout the entire experiment. He was averaging about 204 bushels. If he waited until weeds were 4 inches to remove them and then keep that plot weed-free throughout the rest of the year, falls somewhere between this 199 and 186. So already losing yield at that 4-inch weed height. You can just kind of track the longer you wait to remove those weeds, the more bushels you lose. And if you certainly wait till about 12-inch weeds, he's losing about 50 bushels on average in his trials. So another way of looking at that and giving some more data points in between, now in a bar chart form. So again, this is in centimeters, but this 5 centimeter is 2-inch weeds. And so he certainly has the confidence there in Ontario that if you wait till the weeds are 2 inches tall to remove them, you already kind of lost 5 bushels off the top end. And again, just showing The progression of the longer you wait to control the weeds, the more bushels are lost. And then if you did nothing at all for weed control, you still got some yield, so 85 bushels, but certainly losing a lot of that top end yield by not controlling weeds. The other thing that Peter does pretty well that is try to put some economics behind this. And so certainly one caveat here, whenever Peter put the slide together, corn was $8 a bushel. So keep that in mind when looking at these numbers, but they can certainly adjust because it's really just multiplying the cost of corn per bushel times the yield that he was getting. But just kind of putting more of an economic perspective on waiting to control those weeds. So just when he waited to control weeds until they were 2 inches, we have now flipped the scale here 2 inches. Basically, on average, it was about $20 per acre lost per inch that the weeds grew. So lost $40 per acre when he waited until controlling 2-inch weeds. And again, that's at that $8 per bushel corn. And then it became more rapid after that. And somewhat similar to our research, we did not have that yield loss up here within the 2 to 6 inch weed range, but yield loss increased rapidly as weeds got larger. And basically after weeds were 2 inches tall in some of Dr. Sycam's work, it was about $50 per acre per inch of weed height after that. And just kind of showing how large the economic loss can be the longer you wait to control weeds. So we kind of have a short time window here today to talk about weed control. So I did just want to highlight within the weed guide, again, pages 22 to 29 are the corn section this year. Based on what weeds you're trying to control, the fact there's a whole lot of different premixes on the market containing a whole lot of different active ingredients at different ratios. I was going to highlight just a couple of the pages we put together of some different programs we can look at. Towards the back of the weed guide, we do have weed efficacy ratings. We have also put this in the corn section as some different programs we might look at and on some of our more important weeds. So for today, and a few slides, I'll be focusing on really 3 weeds to control in corn, but just showing if you have other weeds you're dealing with, we do have some of this broken out by some programs within the weed guide. And this is really just a blown up version of that chart I was showing there. So again, something to certainly take some time to look through if you have some certain weeds you're trying to go after and know some of the programs you might be working with. Before I get specifically into weed control, though, I do want to go through one research topic. So this is some research funded by the Corn Council, conducted at Prosper here in Cass County and then at Carrington over the past couple of years. And so one question we always get is as we're looking at dabbling more into cover crops and trying to establish them within our corn, we know based on our growing season, we're not like other parts of the U.S. where we can probably harvest corn and successfully establish cover crops after that. So we're looking at in-season establishment of cover crops into corn. And oftentimes folks may try this around the V6 growth stage of corn. So what we wanted to look at, obviously, as weed scientists, we really want to see residual herbicides to try and get season-long weed control. And so this trial, we applied different residual herbicides at V2 to V3 corn, basically simulating a total post-program, early post-emergence weed control. Planted different cover crops of about V6, so 1 to 2 weeks later, really depending on the year, and then rated injury on these cover crops at set intervals. Looking at the treatment list, so we basically had our non-treated control or no herbicide check. We looked at atrazine at the 3/8 of a pound rate. That can be quite popular because of rotational flexibility after using that rate. We looked at dual magnum, the post-emergence rate of Callisto. We did add all 3 together, which the commercial equivalent would be Lumax at a quart and a half. And then we looked at some other standalone products that might be popularly used in different areas of the state. So different rates of 5 ounces of status, and we had Armazon, another group 27 herbicide similar to Callisto. 2,4-D at a rate that's really too high for most conventional corn, but as we get more enlist corn hybrids, we can use higher rates of 2,4-D, so we wanted to evaluate that. Then wide match, and then harness, another group 15, and then Laudis, another group 27 herbicide. And so what we developed out of this, so if you've looked in the back of the weed guide the past couple of years, we have a table for wheat herbicides and cover crop establishment, and then soybean herbicides and cover crop establishment. So this is based off of 3 site years, so not as many site years of research as what we have currently in the weed guide, but showing a relative risk table, a relative risk model of certain herbicide by cover crop combinations. And so on the left here, we have those same treatments from top to bottom as I've showed on the previous slide. The different cover crops we tested are along the top here. So turnip, radish, rye, oat, lentil, crimson clover, and flax. And then the red boxes have HR or high risk, where we across the site years saw 51 to 100% injury. The orange boxes are medium risk, basically between 21 and 50% injury. Low risk is less than 20% injury on those cover crops, again, seeded a week or 2 after herbicide application. And so some of the common trends we can pull out are between turnip and radish. Some of our brassicas, we can have some high or medium risks based on some herbicides. So certainly atrazine, we had some high risk situations. Callisto is the one group 27 herbicide that we certainly saw risk on both. Interesting that Lautus, we did not see that same injury. Armazon, we did have that injury risk on turnip, but not the same injury on radish. Hopping over here to lentils, this is if you're trying to establish a lentil cover crop within corn, probably one of those to avoid just based on the risk of most of the herbicides we tested. And then clover is one that we had a couple of detections. But if we're looking at, for instance, cereal rye is one of the more popular cover crops we might use. Generally low risk across the board, even really somewhat to my surprise that this the equivalent of 1.5 quarts of Lumax. So rye and oat, if you want to establish both of those crops or cover crops, both relatively low risk, and then flax is also one that we didn't see a whole lot of injury. So hoping to maybe explore this a little bit more and get some more site years under our belt, but this is our table as it stands to date of what we've seen for this risk following some residual herbicide applications. So now I did want to shift gears to talk about weed control, and the 3 weeds I chose to focus on were really based off the survey that I believe Ryan shared earlier during his presentation. So some of the top weeds in corn. And so first I want to focus on Kochia a little bit. And I basically have 1 slide each for foxtail and then Canada thistle. And then hopefully I've left enough time. I do want to share one more research trial after that. But one of the things I wanted to focus on for Kochia, so we had this press release back in December. Brian Jenks put out talking about some of our issues with AIM or carfentrazone, and then Sharpen for burn down control of Kochia in many areas in western North Dakota. And so many of you may have already seen this slide now. We're certainly trying to get the message out for anyone that deals with Kochia that if we do lose AIM and Sharpen as viable burn down options, it's going to be pretty bad news for us in front of a lot of crops. Not so much for corn, though, which is one of the reasons why I want to highlight this. But just showing the slide at hand here. So different populations from 4 different areas of the state. This particular set of plants were sprayed with AIM at 1 and 2 ounces with AMS and MSO. The far left is a susceptible check. Kochia was 2 to 2.5 inches tall, and basically showing all the survivors. Some populations, like Minot, for instance, almost every plant survived. Mott, we do still have some susceptible ones within this particular population, but showing minimal symptomology and certainly plenty of regrowth 8 days after application. Same exact treatments and plants, just brought out another week. So 13 days after that application of AIM, certainly cause for concern with this Kochia population. I did really want to focus a little bit on the plants that Brian sprayed with Sharpen, though. So we're again experiencing some issues with Sharpen within these same populations. A little bit more injury on the plants than AIM, but certainly not control of these plants at the 1x or the 2x rate. In this case, for Sharpen, 1 and 2 ounces were the 1 and the 2x rate. This is, again, those same populations 8 days after application and going out to 13 days after application. So the reason that I want to focus on the sharpen slides for these kochia is traditionally when we look at corn, sharpen is one of the products we can use within corn and expect usually some pretty good burn down activity and also some residual, because we're going to use higher rates of sharpen in corn. So we can use up to 3 ounces of sharpen. Typically, we might get that accomplished by using verdict. So if we use 15 ounces of verdict, that's 3 ounces of sharpen is the ratio in that premix. And so we can actually get more sharpen applied, and usually again if we're going 16 to 18 ounces of verdict is kind of the top end. So certainly that does get us over 3 ounces. Traditionally, one of our good products we can use for kochia control in corn. So what I did want to show is just pulling some information out of the weed guide. I kind of wanted to show as standalone products some of our recommendations, and so knowing we might have a wide variety of experience with corn and kochia and this Zoom today, again, just pulling out the single active ingredients. Within corn, it certainly gets a lot more complicated than that in a hurry with all the premixes. But one of the things I just wanted to show is from a pre-emergence or a strictly residual standpoint. So assuming you had a successful burn down or had tillage to start clean, atrazine at the 3/8 of a pound rate, generally fair as we rated over the years in our trials. Does look a lot better with adding in a group 27 herbicide. And so that's our products like Callisto, Laudis, products like that. There is a synergy between group 27 herbicides and atrazine, and we do get some better residual control. Some of the other products that we generally rate good to excellent, or basically greater than 80% control, balance, where we can, in parts of the state and soils where we can use balance, a pretty good product to work with. Dicamba pre-emergence generally is excellent for us, but I put an asterisk because focus a little bit on the PPO resistance, or soon to be hopefully confirmed PPO resistance. We do have dicamba resistance across the state too. And looking towards other states that have some more experience with dicamba resistant kochia, Montana, Colorado, Kansas, talking to colleagues in those areas, we still can get some good benefit out of a residual application of higher rates of dicamba to control even dicamba resistant kochia. One of the issues is we can't go too high in corn, or else we will get some injury in corn. So a little asterisk there on dicamba that know the population you're working with, I guess. And then sharpen, generally, if we go 2 to 3 ounces, good to excellent control. Again, we need to monitor some of these populations that Dr. Jenks is screening to see if we may be losing some efficacy out of sharpen residual. And then post-emergence, wanted to highlight, basically we're relying a lot on either atrazine or Buctril. Either of those plus a group 27 herbicide will be a good combination. Otherwise, we're kind of relying on dicamba or fluroxapyr. So standalone to Starane, used quite a bit of wide match as well. And so just one of the things I wanted to highlight is some of these are also products that we're using in our small grains, generally a little bit higher rate though. So use quite a lot of bromoxynil, wide match in our small grains. We can use a little bit higher rates in corn. If we're talking about crop rotation, just want to be cautious of if these products are starting to slip on kochia control in small grains, it's not going to be too long before you can expect them to slip in corn as well. And so that's where we kind of go back to this recommendation. We can use an atrazine plus a group 27 herbicide, even throw in some lower rates of dicamba, maybe in the form of status, to get 3 or 4 effective modes of action for relatively cheap on corn post-emergence. So one slide on foxtail, since this was one of the weeds that made Ryan's survey. Generally, when we're looking at foxtail, we're going to be relying on a group 15 herbicide and or balance from a pre-emergence perspective for good to excellent foxtail control. Post-emergence, the absolute best for us will be glyphosate. You do have to, of course, have Roundup Ready traits in that corn, but where you can use Roundup Ready corn, glyphosate will certainly help us with foxtail control in some of these areas where we are struggling in some of our small grains. Roundup Ready corn would be a good alternative to help clean up the populations. If we have non-Roundup ready corn, then we do go into our Group 27 herbicides. So Impact and Armazon, and there's a newer product called Shield X, are generally the best Group 27 herbicides for post-emergence foxtail control. Laudis might be a step below them, and then Callisto, as far as the Group 27s, is probably the weakest on the grasses. All of these are better with atrazine, though, so focusing on that synergy between atrazine and a Group 27 herbicide. And then for those who do like to use some other products, Rimsulfuron is in many premixes. Realm Q might be one of the more popular ones. Does have some decent foxtail control. That is a Group 2 herbicide, though, so as we start getting more Group 2 resistance in our foxtails, Rimsulfuron might be one to keep an eye on for performance. And then the other weed that made Ryan's list I wanted to touch on briefly was Canada Thistle. And so somewhat similar to what I mentioned for post-emergence Kochia control, a lot of the products we might use in corn are available and currently being used in small grains. So we don't really have any good pre-herbicide options for Canada Thistle, so post-emergence is really where we get this done. But anything with clopyralid, so Stinger is a standalone product, and then all these are premixes containing clopyralid, one of our better options post-emergence for Canada Thistle. Dicamba can be fair to good. Status and Diflex might be the more popular products that we use in corn, but we can certainly use higher rates of dicamba in other situations, like pasture, rangeland, fallow, or prevent plant. The rates we're using in corn without injuring or laying over our corn, we just don't get that good to excellent control out of. Glyphosate, if you time it for that pre-bud application, can be very good for in-crop control. And then just showing that our Group 27 herbicides tank mixed with atrazine, we get some control, but not quite as good as the top 2 or 3 things on this slide. So I think I've got a couple minutes left. I wanted to briefly show what can be one of the bigger challenges for us for controlling corn. So we've talked quite a bit about Palmer amaranth in general over the past couple of years. I wanted to show a little bit of research in corn. And so we have a research site in Barnes County where we do have resistance to 5 different modes of action within this population. So Group 2s don't use a whole lot of those in corn. Group 4 is 2,4-D and dicamba. Glyphosate, these are our residual chloroacetamides, and then talks quite a bit about Group 27 herbicides. So resistance to 5 different modes of action here. I'm just going to skip forward since I see Ryan's on the screen, which is my timer. I just want to show a tale of 2 years if we're trying to do a complete post-emergence program for controlling Palmer amaranth in corn. So one thing you might notice, especially the further west you go, that some of these rates seem awfully high. We're basically using full rates of commercial products and a lot of different tank mixes. So 10 or 11 different programs on the screen applied at V2 corn, which was about 14 days after planting for us. In 2021, a drought year, we got pretty good control. So all these programs, basically 97 to 99% control 6 weeks after application. What I really wanted to highlight here today is kind of what we can see as a worst case scenario. Again, on this 5-way resistant Palmer amaranth population, same application timing, 14 days after planting. This is now just 4 weeks after that application. And here in 2022, more rainfall. We had more Palmer emerge with the corn. So we did not have a pre-emergence down to control the early flush. And we started to lose a lot of control when we tried a post-only program. So one of the worst products in this case, in this trial, was Acuron GT. From a post-emergence standpoint, we're relying on glyphosate and 2 different Group 27 herbicides. We have resistance to both, and we didn't get the best of control. I also kind of highlight on the other end, towards the bottom here, we've got a tank mix of Status, Outlook, atrazine, and glyphosate. So dicamba, atrazine, glyphosate, 81% control, but the prior year we were getting closer to complete control. So even another program with 3 different effective foliar modes of action, not getting complete control. And so just a couple pictures of what that looked like. and these can be a little bit deceptive because they're blown up. This plant over here was about 8 leaf, about a 1/2 inch tall at application. And the pink you see on the margins is showing we did have group 27 herbicides in the tank, but the new growth is completely fine. And so another just reason to bring awareness with Palmer amaranth is some weed populations we can clean up with chemistry in corn. If we import some of these 5-way resistant populations, even some of our corn programs, once Palmer is out of the ground, will be difficult, if not impossible, to completely control. So with that, I just want to leave it on this slide. For those who want the weed guide within our state, physical copies are out there at every county office. This QR code in the bottom right part of the screen is an electronic copy of the weed guide.